Once again, please.
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this August 4th, 2021 meeting of the North Carolina State Board of Education. I'm Eric Davis, Chair of the Board, and I call this meeting to order. And welcome board members, advisors, staff, on-site visitors, online listeners, and Twitter followers. Please note that you can follow the State Board on its Twitter page at EDStateBoard_NC, and you can follow the meeting and see all of our materials online. For our visitors and those listening online, today's agenda involves our board committee sessions, and tomorrow's agenda is the official meeting when the board will vote on action items. Board members are reminded that it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of the board. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. If during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. Our battle over COVID-19 has required a renewed focus on resource allocation, human capital, school performance, and ultimately opportunity and access for all of our students. This battle has demonstrated the strength and fortitude of our public education system. Our educators reimagined education nearly overnight to benefit the academic and non-academic skills of our students, proving once again that we are at our best when we focus on meeting the needs of the whole child within each and every child. While we were able to return to a degree of normal, with more districts and schools offering in-person instruction during the 2020-2021 school year, our battle with COVID is far from over and requires our continued dedication to guiding principles of equity and whole child. Our district leaders have made countless difficult decisions with their local boards of education as students, educators, and staffs have returned to school. August signals the return to school for the majority of our traditional calendar year students and the remaining year-round students. We commend the courage and strength of our superintendents, principals, and all local leaders for their selfless service this past year. Along with what we've learned from the ABC Collaborative about the value of masks to protect our unvaccinated students, combined with guidance from the Department of Health and Human Services, including adoption of the revised Strong Schools Toolkit later in our meeting, we remain committed to providing a safe environment in our schools this year for in-person instruction. Moreover, I'd like to address the most recent COVID-19 health guidance documents issued by the Federal Center for Disease Control, our State Department of Health and Human Services, our governor, and how these documents pertain to this State Board of Education meeting. Those of us here at the State Board those of us here at the State Board meeting without masks today have been fully vaccinated. We've chosen to self-report this information voluntarily to Human Resources or complete an attestation form upon entry to the building so that we can remove our masks for the duration of today and tomorrow's events. While mask wearing indoors is not required if someone is vaccinated, it's a choice. And some of our colleagues may continue to make that choice, and we respect their choices. Those who have not been vaccinated are required to wear a mask while in the building. And we ask our visitors here today in the audience to do the same. If you're voluntarily willing to attest to having been vaccinated upon entry and receive and display a visitor's pass to indicate such, we welcome you to remove your mask. But if you're comfortable with this, if you're not comfortable with this process, we respect that too. However, if you choose not to attest to your vaccinated status, please leave your mask on. Thank you for cooperation as we work to keep our staff and teammates safe in this building. I would also like to continue to urge each one of us who is able to get a vaccine. While more than 92% of North Carolina COVID-19 cases are in those who are not fully vaccinated, we know how important and how effective the vaccine is in stopping the spread of COVID-19 and in stopping the Delta variant. We know it can help keep our students, parents, our teachers, and school staff safe. Personally, I consider a vaccination to be more than an act of individual health and safety, but also an act of compassion for our neighbor and a sign of unity in our shared battle and determination to defeat COVID. We hope you'll join in this important and life-saving efforts by getting vaccinated. Board members, you've seen the agenda for over a week, had the opportunity to review it. I ask if there are any requests for changes to the agenda. Hearing none, I ask for a motion for approval of the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, Wendell
Motion by
Hall.
Ms. Kamnitz. Is there a second?
Second, Wendell Hall.
Olivia Oxendine. I offer a second.
Second by Dr. Oxendine. Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll to capture the vote?
Sir. Dr. Oxendine,
Yes.
Ms. Kamnitz,
Yes.
Mr. Keenan,
Yes.
Mr. Keenan,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes. Do you hear
Dr.
me?
Tipton Rogers,
Yes.
White,
Yes.
Mr. Chastain,
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor,
Yes.
Mr. Keenan,
Yes. Can you hear me?
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Deanna, this is Donna. Mr. Hall and Mr. Keenan are saying yes, but I don't know if you can hear them.
Hello?
Hello?
Okay. Sorry, guys. Some audio difficulties. So, Mr. Keenan,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers,
Yes.
Mr. Chastain, Lieutenant Governor, Vice Chair
Yes.
Duncan. Thank you, sir. Vice Chair Duncan
Yes.
Davis.
Yes. Motion carries. Thank you. We'll now proceed to today's committee meetings, and a note to the committee chairs and audience that all voting on consent and any item requiring action will be completed tomorrow via roll call. We'll begin with our Student Learning and Achievement Committee chaired by Ms. Jill Kamnitz. Ms. Kamnitz.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I'm joined in the work of this committee with my colleague, Dr. Olivia Oxendine, who serves as Vice Chair. We start with new business this morning, and our first item is an update on the North Carolina Computer Science Initiative. We always appreciate and enjoy these updates about the excellent work that is being done by the Computer Science and Technology Education team at DPI, led by Dr. Hempel. Today, we'll also be hearing directly from some of our students, which is a wonderful way to begin our meeting this month. So, Dr. Hempel.
Thank you so much. Chairman Davis, esteemed members of the board, and all those assembled, and State Superintendent Truitt, thank you so much. It brings me great pleasure to bring an update for the North Carolina Computer Science Initiative exactly 1 year after the board has absolved to add North Carolina computer science standards to our department. So we're very, very excited this morning. As we see in our first slide, one of the first things that we wanted to do was to make sure that the report to the General Assembly stated that we wanted to expand opportunities for all students across North Carolina. I think it's the other PowerPoint. It's okay. That's okay. We're going to pivot. So I will bring you updates and then we'll bring our students. When it comes to the computer science opportunities for all students, one of the first initiatives was to make sure that we created consumers and creators. So this was the difference between using Instagram to post a picture versus the algorithm and coding necessary to create Instagram. So over the past year, we are grateful to our school leaders, teacher leaders, district leaders who came together to ensure that the instructional supports were not only uploaded to the North Carolina DPI website, and this is the first department that has been added in over 11 years, but also we are grateful to the over 300 K-12 educators who helped us with the instructional support documents as well. This was an iterative process that took over 13 months and 1,000 person hours from standard writing from the 2017 CSTA standards to the now 2020 North Carolina Computer Science standards. What's exciting is that this is the first time that our K-5 students will be immersed in concepts such as cybersecurity, data and algorithms, impacts on computing, and really thinking about how their digital citizenship and their digital fingerprint is going to impact them from the crib to career. So what you will see as you look at the North Carolina DPI website, particularly on the computer science page, is that we have brought together over 50 educators for the first FAQ for computer science. There are so many questions about what computer science was going to look like in K through 8, and we're excited now to elevate a cross-curricular crosswalk. This is going to help our K-8 teachers really think about computer science and the equivalent grade bands in English language arts, math, science, social studies, and digital teaching and learning. It was important after we did our first iteration and survey for our K2 and 3-5 teachers to understand what computer science looked like in the classroom. So with this crosswalk, you will not only have course descriptors, which takes each standard and delineates exactly what that standard means in elementary school, middle school, and high school, but also how it can manifest in the classroom when it comes to merging interdisciplinary lessons with English language arts, math, science, and social studies. It was very, very important that we elevated these exemplars because although this work started in 2019, we have teachers across North Carolina who have been teaching computer science for years. So we really wanted to make sure that we had a robust bridge and instructional support. The other piece that we have elevated on the website as well, and that we have been able to share with the field, is the CSTA crosswalk. In 2017, the national standards for computer science were adopted, and we used those as the foundation for the North Carolina standards. So we were able to really help our teachers, our school leaders, and our district leaders understand what this could look like in North Carolina classrooms. Now, as you've heard me say before, the realities of our over 116 LEAs across the educational regions are very different when it comes to computer science. When we created #IamComputerScience, we wanted to make sure that our students, our rural communities, and also our other demographics that were largely not represented in computer science had an opportunity to see themselves in realistic and tangible ways. We know that Sally Ride said you can become anything that you can see. So we wanted to take computer science, which is a living and breathing component of the North Carolina Standard Course of Study, and put it in our students' hands. And so today I'm very, very excited to introduce to you the student team who created and implemented and facilitated in May of this past year the first student-led virtual summit for computer science for the state of North Carolina. These 6 students came together and not only developed the concept for the virtual summit, but they would serve as the keynote speakers, the facilitators, and the participants of this as well across our state. and they've already begun plans for next year to have, hopefully, safely, a face-to-face summit. Amaya Riviera comes from the Northeast Academy of Aerospace and Advanced Technologies. She's a rising junior, and her expertise is also STEM and leadership relation, as well as infographics and graphic art. Siani Simone Amons comes from Wilson Early College. She has just been accepted into the North Carolina School of Science and Math. She is a rising 11th grader, and her area of expertise is student misconceptions about STEM. We have here today Gabrielle Hoskins, who is also at the Northeast Academy for Aerospace and Advanced Technologies. She is a rising 11th grader, and her area of expertise is designing a better future through STEM. We have here today Jonna Speller. She is from Scotland High School, recently accepted to the North Carolina School of Science and Math, and a rising 11th grader, and she served as our #IMCS Summit leader. Olivia Stevens at J.M. Alexander Middle School, who is a rising 9th grader. Her area of expertise is STEM and communications. And last but not least, we have here today Whitley Riles, a rising 10th grader at Rocky River High School, and her area of expertise is STEM and communications. So without further ado, Gabrielle Hoskins, Jonna Speller, and Whitney Riles.
Morning, everyone. We would like to begin by thanking you all for this incredible opportunity and for all of the hard work that each and every one of you do to support the educational success of students across North Carolina.
On Saturday, May 15th, 2021, a team of 6 female students led the first annual #IMCS Summit with a mission to connect students across North Carolina who are either interested or involved in STEM. This leaving students uplifted and inspired to break down the barriers that hinder us from pursuing the opportunities that lie within STEM, computer science, and technology.
Today, our team of #IMCS student leaders will be presenting the purpose, process, and outcome of this enterprise.
And to get us started with our presentation, us student leaders would like to introduce ourselves. As stated before, on the screen you can see our entire team of student leaders who worked extremely hard to put this year's #IMCS Student-Led Computer Science Summit together. And although all were unfortunately unable to be present today, our entire team did come together again to put today's presentation together for you all. And with that being said, I'll go ahead and start us off. Hello again, my name is Jonna Speller. I am a rising junior from Scotland High School, but will be attending the North Carolina School of Science and Mathematics in the fall. And as an intern for DPI's Computer Science and Technology Education Department, I served as the team's lead student leader.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Gabrielle Hoskins. I'm a rising junior at Northeast Academy for Aerospace and Advanced Technologies. That is a charter school based around STEM. With that being said, my overall experience in STEM is clubs or presentations such as this discussing the importance within STEM in schools. I serve as a workshop student leader, workshop facilitator, and the keynote speaker for this summit.
Hello, everyone. I'm Whitley Riles. I'm a rising sophomore at Rocky River School. I'm an intern for the Dottie Rose Foundation for Computer Science, STEM, and Girls in Tech. My general experience with STEM is mostly programming, data, and core computer science concepts. I served as a student leader for the summit and was a part of marketing. For our table of contents, first we have Jonna discussing our process, which is our problem and reasoning. Second, I will be taking you all through the highlights of the summit, which is based on our workshops, intro, and closing remarks. Third, Gabby will be giving a call to action, which is our highlight of our mission. And fourth, we will join together in discussing our next steps.
Beginning with our process, this section dives into the 4 main components of creating our STEM initiative: understanding the problem, the birth of an idea, the team, and the summit. I believe that there are numerous problems that impact students' perceptions of themselves and their ability to pursue STEM as a career or even a hobby. There are many boundaries withholding students from taking advantage of the endless opportunities that lies within STEM. But in an effort to understand what the problem is, we broke it down into 3 sections. Understanding the problem included looking into students' perspectives of STEM and researching the status of gender and racial diversity within STEM.
When looking into students' perspectives, we found that some students who did not pursue STEM felt that from an educational standpoint, it was too much of a challenge, that they weren't good enough, that they weren't smart or talented enough, and this overall led them to viewing STEM as too high caliber, or that only certain types of students were meant to pursue STEM.
Before diving into our research, I'd like to state that current gender and racial diversity mirrors representation gap within the STEM workforce. In terms of gender diversity, men outnumber women in this field. Women make up only 28% of the STEM workforce, and this gap is particularly high for some of the fastest growing and highest paid jobs of the future, such as computer science and technology. Now, speaking to racial diversity, Black and Hispanic students are less likely to pursue degrees in STEM than in other fields. For example, Black students earned only 7% of bachelor's degrees in STEM in 2018. Meanwhile, white students earned 62% of bachelor's degrees in STEM within that same year. Meanwhile, white and Asian students are still being overrepresented. These discrepancies are reflected within the workforce as well. From 2017 to 2019, Black professionals made up only 9% of the STEM workforce, and this gap was even higher for Hispanic professionals, who made up only 8%. And this is where we came in, or more specifically, Jana came in, with the tools of Ms. Hemphill and Ms. Brightwell. They both decided that we would expose our elementary, middle, and high school students to the world of STEM, showing them this pathway will be easily accessible because it begins with providing this educational resource and increasing the pursuit and use of this resource as well.
After taking the time to reflect upon student challenges and research the statistics behind them, I put together ideas of ways that hashtag IMCS could be used to reach, engage with, and encourage North Carolina students involved with or interested in computer science and STEM. My ideas included videos, workshops, crash courses, and in-depth learning sessions. Each idea was intended to showcase different aspects of both computer science and STEM. After some deliberation, Dr. Hemphill and I came to the conclusion of combining these ideas into a computer science summit. I began working immediately and laid out a plan of action to first create a schedule of events for the summit as a foundation, then find students to help lead in and develop this initiative, set a date for the summit, and begin creating it. As you all know, one of the first actions that I had to take was to find students across North Carolina and develop a team of student leaders. I began this by putting out a call for student leaders for the creation and marketing of the summit through a registration form marketed throughout the state. The process of finding student leaders was initially difficult because students were not registering. But then after this, Dr. Hemphill and I directly reached out to STEM leaders and educators throughout the state, and registration began to increase. After hosting an introduction meeting, the team of student leaders was officially created, and we began working right away. The date that we decided on for the summit was May 15th of 2021. Our team created a summit that encompassed 3 workshops, one on how STEM and leadership relate, one on designing a better future through STEM, and one on student misconceptions about STEM, a STEM and computer science networking session, a student keynote speaker, a student closing speaker, and merchandise. The first hashtag IMCS student-led computer science summit was a success, and it is definitely just the beginning of something exceptionally great for our fellow North Carolina students.
I'd now like to introduce you all to our highlights. With our highlights, we're now moving into what we liked and took away from this year's summit. The first highlight were the discussions that took place throughout the entire summit. There were several discussions that took place with the audience through their interactive games there were several discussions that took place with the audience. Through interactive games that we created and engaging forums given to the audience. Discussions also emerged through our networking section. Our networking section was where we had a panel of 5 STEM and computer science professionals who answered questions and interacted with the audience, giving their wisdom, inspiration, and encouragement. Important and exciting discussions also occurred through the student leaders' workshops and breakout rooms within the summit, as well as during their plannings and meetings prior. Through the great interactions and discussions that occurred, fun was present and continued throughout the summit as well. The wealth of knowledge that all who attended were granted through the students, guest speakers, and workshop facilitators was also a major highlight of our summit. The students, guest speakers, and workshop facilitators' points and questions left each and every individual in attendance thinking and invigorated to learn more. And lastly, the opportunity for networking to occur was a highlight for our summit because of the wonderful and successful speakers who came to support the summit and connect with the students while sharing their knowledge as STEM and computer science professionals.
As student leaders, it is our responsibility to showcase the importance of STEM. I currently attend a STEM school, but a lot of students within North Carolina do not even know what STEM stands for, let alone have the opportunity to explore their interest. Hashtag IMCS answered this call, creating a summit for North Carolina students to attend where they can learn the importance of STEM and how it relates to our real world. Understanding the importance of STEM is crucial for today's world, and this summit went over each sector regarding the misconceptions, leadership, and more. STEM is something that is slowly but surely transforming the way our students learn and making more jobs for the future generation. Not only does it help develop good mental habits, but it promotes critical thinking skills and innovation. STEM is perceived as a masculine field. Young females need more role models, and as you can see, this summit provided that. I am very proud to say that this summit was amazing for North Carolina students. And as you can see on the screen, these are the workshop posters that our 3 workshop facilitators created. With their own unique theme and slideshow, they have full creative control on how they wanted to present this topic. Understanding the importance of STEM, designing a better future through STEM, and the misconceptions of STEM were our 3 workshops. Amaya Rivera, Siani Simone Amons, and myself were the workshop facilitators.
And bringing us to our final section of today's presentation, I will be starting us off with our next steps. I am elated to say that the hashtag IMCS Computer Science Summit will continue as an annual event. We intend for this to be an event that improves upon itself every year through the efforts of students' participation and their leadership. Due to this, the summit will also continue to be student-led. We believe that it is of value for students to be able to learn from one another and grow in their leadership. So each year we will be encouraging that the students participating register for leadership positions after participating in the summit at least once. By doing this every year, students will be able to take what they have learned from their experience with previous student leaders' work and create something of their own to share with more students across the state and inspire them to get involved in computer science and STEM.
With all that being said, our 2022 upcoming goals. 1, we will grow the team of student leaders, grow building upon what we have already created. We will open our interests in greater marketing opportunities and potential partnerships with STEM, CS leaders, and educators across North Carolina. Lastly, we will improve every year through the efforts of North Carolina students. Upon all these goals, this can lead to the main goal of an in-person 2022 #IMCS Student-Led Computer Science Summit.
The tagline for the hashtag IMCS Student-Led Summit is not what the future holds for you, but what you hold for the future. This quoting the power within students, inspiring them to take on STEM education and careers. This event was a space and a moment where North Carolina students can explore and understand how important STEM and computer science education is. Students are the heart of making the summit possible, but they will learn they are the heart of making change possible.
Thank you all for everything. I appreciate you all for listening and supporting the first hashtag I am for supporting the hashtag I am CS First Student-Led Summit.
Thank you all for your time and your support from North Carolina students. We can assure you all that opportunities like these truly mean a lot.
Thank you for your continuous support to the students of North Carolina. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns?
Questions, Ms. Clements?
I will just say, I don't have a question, but I am just so blown away by what you all have shared. I just wanted to say very quickly, thank you to Dr. Hemphill for all the work in facilitating this, and you guys represent it. It just excited me and inspired me to learn more, and the opportunities that you are providing our students across North Carolina is amazing. So thank you for all the hard work, because I know it was a lot of hard work that you put into doing this, and I'm looking forward to seeing this grow even more. So thank you guys.
Yes.
Superintendent Truitt.
Ladies, you may be experts in STEM and computer science, but I think you all could teach us a thing or two about public speaking. That was amazing. I truly, I mean, you all have really obviously developed a skill that many adults never develop. It's very, very difficult to do good public speaking, and the three of you have done just that. I also want to say that I'm incredibly impressed by the amount of goal setting, the organization that you've brought to this endeavor through goal setting is just incredible. So congratulations to you all, and thank you for being advocates for not just STEM, but computer science specifically. I've not heard this quote before. It's not what the future holds for you, but what you hold for the future. Did one of you come up with that? That is absolutely phenomenal and so true. And it reminds me of President Kennedy's "Ask not what you can do for your country, but ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." This is so true about how K-12 education needs to be thinking about careers and how we keep students connected to what the post-secondary plans of their choice are going to be. So again, thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Hemphill. You are amazing as well. And I'm just so grateful to you all. Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
As I said, what a wonderful way to start our meeting. So our next item of new business is the draft North Carolina Standard Course of Study Procedures Manual. And Superintendent Truitt, I believe, is going to introduce us to this work that would guide our future standard course of study revisions.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. And before I turn it over to Drs. Stegall and Edmonds, I do just want to briefly share with the board that in last month at our last board meeting, I indicated that I would like to come back to the board with perhaps a different template for which we could use to develop standards and to improve standards. And in the process of doing that work, Dr. Stegall actually shared with me that there has been a procedures manual that had, and he's going to share the history of that manual, that had been re-examined in 2018, but had never been brought before the board. And so when he shared that manual with me, I immediately thought to myself, this is exactly what we should be looking at. Rather than looking at a specific template, we need to be looking at this manual as a whole. And then coincidentally, Maureen Stover and I were together with our Regional Teachers of the Year. And I had a Teacher of the Year, Jenny Bryant, who's a high school history teacher, shared with me that she believed that there is inequity in the way that districts approach the unpacking of new or revised standards. And so that conversation ended up taking on a life of its own. And I hope that you all will consider closely what Dr. Stegall and Edmonds are going to share with you this morning. Thank you, Ms. Cabrons.
Thank you, Superintendent. Dr. Stegall?
Good morning. This is typical with someone that comes after a presentation like that. I usually say, hate to be the one to follow that group, but I'm humbled to follow a group like that. I'm telling you what, if that doesn't ground us back into what we're doing and inspire you, then nothing will. And so ladies, I will give you my business card. By the time you graduate, I would be willing to learn computer science to figure out if I could work for you ladies. I would follow them anywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you all feel the same way. Good morning, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, and State Board members and Superintendent Truitt. It is my pleasure to bring to you an update on the Standard Course of Study Procedures Manual, along with my colleague, Dr. Catherine Edmonds. Our purpose today is to provide the board with an overview of the procedures manual as was shared, and then the draft revisions that we want to make to that manual, and an explanation of issues that manual sits right now, what are still needed to be done, and we humbly ask that you direct us to complete this manual to ensure consistent, coherent, equitable standards for all teachers, regardless of what district they're in and the resources that they have. A little historical information, as was shared by Superintendent Truitt. There was an original version of a procedures manual that was created in the department. It was internal only, didn't come before the board in 1998. It was really a first attempt to operationalize the approach to writing standards and align the efforts and the way it's structured and everything. In February 2018, the at that point, Standards Curriculum Instruction Division leadership brought the scope of work proposal to the state board to inform this process, and it started in April 2018. According to meeting minutes, Dr. Stacy Wilson Norman, stated to the board that this policy was built upon the work from the past, and she added they have tried to replicate some of the best practices learned from the work of the Status Review Commission. The goal was to establish guiding principles that help guide transparency and engagement, communicates a uniform process, which we know is vital. They wanted to clearly outline 3 varied phases for review, revision and implementation as well. Create a timeline for all the standards to be reviewed and align assessments and resources within the policy so that there was one consistent, and that's the key piece, way of communicating what will happen as standards were reviewed and developed. The staff developed a project team to develop protocol to go along with this. The vision and objective for a procedures manual was essentially to promote transparency and stakeholder engagement in every standards review, revision, and implementation. NCDPI would use this uniform and formalized system built on 4 guiding principles. And these 4 principles, by the way, are directly stated in the state board policy, SCOS 012. 4 principles are feedback-based, research-informed, improvement-oriented, and process-driven. And all this language is from that 2018. As you see, the vision objective, again, as we stated, was to include all content areas. And at the time, computer science, which we just heard from, was not included because it was not yet adopted, but computer science would obviously be included with this going forward. So the manual contents that we're proposing and that already exist and we're proposing to expound upon and formalize are purpose and guiding principles, common terminology, which includes a revised Bloom's taxonomy information. Again, be reminded that these are the verbs that frame expectations for how students will show mastery. alignment with textbooks and assessments, a process for the review phase, which includes survey, selection criteria, and analysis of feedback. It will also have a process for a revision phase, which includes writing teams, standards templates, creating drafts, and collecting feedback, and a process for the implementation phase, which are the major activities for installation, initial implementation, full implementation, and then the process is called maintenance and refinement as we go along through the multi-year process. Dependencies would also include sample templates and letters, acronyms, references, glossary, and so forth. The functionality of the procedures manual should provide consistency among standards and the standards revision process. As the superintendent has stated, the way it's structured now, different content areas look different. They're structured differently. The way the templates that are used are different. The language is different. So we want to have some consistency among the standards and the revision. The procedures manual will provide a framework for the standards revision to ensure that we're aligned to your state board policy SCOS 012. And we want to create a clear process for standards revision that provides a more coherent product to guide the development of local curriculum. As will be shared a little bit later, school districts take our standards that are adopted by you as the board, and they put this into practice with curriculum development, scopes and sequence, resources at the local level. And we want to be as supportive with that as possible. The work in 2018 was very valuable. With just a few pieces within the manual clarified, this manual can be a coherent product to use during the standards revision process. I believe principals, superintendents, curriculum leaders, teachers will find great value in this. It's my pleasure to turn over next to my colleague, Dr. Edmonds.
Good morning, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Truitt, board members, and those that are listening to us and those that are out in the audience. It is certainly a pleasure to be before you this morning to talk with you and share with my colleague, Dr. Stegall, the process of the manual, developing the manual, but also looking at it from the perspective of the local context. And so we know that the task of drafting and approving academic content standards is difficult, time-consuming, but it's necessary to ensure standards, the best standards possible for our teachers to plan from. When the state adopts a new standard course of study, the next steps of preparation at the district level is curriculum development for teacher instruction. For example, unpacking of the standards, developing pacing guides, developing or purchasing resource materials. And researchers have stated that when states with inadequate standards provide overboard, vague, and otherwise insufficient guidance for curriculum and instruction. And so when we look at what's missing, if you look at the first slide, the science standards, it's very specific about what students should know and be able to do. And when you go to the next standard that's in your, the PowerPoint, you will see that there's a lot of language there, but it's vague about what is the expectation for students and being very specific about what it is that we want students to know and be able to do. And so as we were looking at this and in an effort to determine how districts are approaching the work of unpacking the standards once this the standard course of study has been passed by the state board, we sent out a survey to the different school districts, and we had a very great response. We had I think it was about 63 districts that responded to the survey. And these are some of the pieces that we found from our superintendents. And so when we asked, who does this work at the district level? Well, it varied. It could be teachers being paid a stipend in the summertime. It could be hiring outside organizations to come in and support with that work. It was kind of across the gamut of what was being done. And some of the superintendents provided some specific feedback. For example, district staff pay stipends to teams of teachers who serve on curriculum design teams. While district staff ensure quality and consistency, teachers carry the majority of the workload. And when I heard that and thought about that, I said, what about those districts that have a lot of new teachers on staff? And in a particular content area, what if they have teachers that maybe the majority of them have 1 to 2 years of experience? how does that translate into the quality of the resources for the school districts to use? And another said, we do not have any staff dedicated for these tasks. We have to pay teachers to review the standards and develop pacing guides. In a larger district staff may do this. In a small district, it most likely are teachers themselves. And so then I keep going back and to that whole thing of, so what does that mean? So when we start out a school year and we're planning for our students, what does that mean for the resources across our state? Are we ensuring that there's equity in that work and the resources for the teachers in terms of curriculum and instruction? And the district staff does not have the resources nor the subject level expertise in all areas required to do this work alone. With the new social studies standards and a glossary that is 94 pages, this creates a tremendous amount of work for our districts to implement and implement well. And implementation work hours, our district is very small and handles the initial changes to organize and then push to the school staff to implement the trainings by working in the summers or after regular school hours. And when we looked at the funding piece, we saw that districts were spending from zero additional dollars to 1.1 million or more to have these instructional materials, this curriculum instructional resources for teachers at the beginning of the school year. And so as my colleague has shared, we are looking at if we have standards that are more specific and very clear about what we expect children to be able to learn and be able to do, then that will help districts in turn be able to develop the resources and the curriculum that our students need and our teachers need. As my colleague shared the recommendation, we're recommending that the State Board of Education require DPI to revise and update the procedures manual for the development of the North Carolina Standard Course of Study. This time, my colleague and I will take questions.
Questions?
I have a quick question, Dr. Ms. Kamnitz. I applaud all of you, Superintendent Truitt and the staff, for taking on this very worthwhile responsibility undertaking. The procedure manual is going to be the guiding force to take us to the next step to get from standards to curricula. What I speculate is the missing piece here across the state and the information on the inequities that you have outlined based on the survey feedback from the districts is very helpful. If we focused on the meaning of a curricula development to help school districts get from standards to curriculum, because to me, that is the missing piece. And in our districts that lack the resources, whether it be money or personnel or content expertise, what typically happens, and I'm talking from experience, knowing what often happens in my region and perhaps around the state. And it's no one's fault. It's just a matter of we don't have the money, the resources, the time to make this happen. What often happens is they go from the educators and teachers and the curriculum, they go from the standards immediately, or they use the standards to represent curricula. So because the curriculum piece is not developed, it's not, it just isn't there, it's absent. The other thing that often happens is classroom teachers, out of desperation, because they don't have the curricula, they will Google, I call it a Googleized curriculum. So they Google their resources, they Google activity. So we do have a curriculum in North Carolina, like it or not. It's called, for lack of a better word, it's a Googleized curricula. Now we do have school systems, don't get me wrong, we do have school systems around the state that do a great job in the area of developing curricula. But I think coming out of the department and the State Board of Education certainly supporting this endeavor, we can really go far in helping our districts understand what does it mean to design and develop and implement curriculum.
I'll echo Dr. Oxendine's comments. I think the emphasis here is the idea that we could collapse and collaborate the work without offering a mandate. And that means using common resources to develop curricula, but then just offering districts the opportunity to select. And it's a better use of, it's more fiscally responsible to do that, but I would advocate for continued choice and flexibility among the districts to be able to select, including teachers who already exercise that flexibility every day and every other search engine that's out there, in addition to Google, where they're quickly trying to scramble for resources. But if we could collapse and collaborate without a mandate, I think we will have accomplished the goal.
Absolutely.
I think that realization that we are a local control state as far as this goes has to inform that work as you all move forward to address this problem. Any other comments?
Madam Chair, Wendell Hall.
Advisors. Chair Davis.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Cabinets. I agree with my colleagues on the worthiness of this approach, and that our intent should be to lighten the burden on our districts. But I think you've highlighted a serious resource issue. It's more than just providing effective tools. We need to do all that. We need to do it efficiently as we can, and we need to improve what we deliver to our districts. But in a state with the abundant resources that North Carolina has, it's quite shameful that districts don't have the staff they need to do the work. And I think it's inherent upon us to call for those resources, call for that staffing. The districts that are most strained in this example that you've given are the districts that most need the staffing. We have the resources, we have the money. We just need the will to commit it, particularly to those districts most in need of the professional staff to deliver high quality curriculum and instruction to our students. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair Davis.
To piggyback off of the chair's comments, while we are waiting for those resources and that staff, and as Dr. Edmonds shared, we're talking about, again, $0 to $1.1 million of difference in what districts are able to dedicate to this work. What I submit to the board is that until that equity is there, that the department compensate for that inequity. So yes, we have resources and we have expertise and we have it here at the department. And there's no reason that we cannot include in our standards drafting, review, and revision process optional materials for teachers to choose from, as well as assessments, because that expertise does reside in the department, and it resides in our Teachers of the Year. It resides in the subject matter experts at the department and in the teachers that we contract with to do this work. It's just a matter of putting pencil to paper and creating these resources, again, that could be a choice for districts to use.
So perhaps this would be another piece of the supporting documents that we're also familiar with because we've been talking about them so much over the last few months. So perhaps that might be where that would live.
I would agree with that.
Any other comments before we move on? Chair Davis, the recommendation is for us to request that staff move forward with this work. How do we accomplish that? Is that just?
Well, this is an item of new business. I believe then it would come back before us in a future meeting with a specific plan for how to move forward for the board to consider. in that fashion.
We will move on, move forward. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Edmonds. Thank you, Dr. Sabel. Finally, last item of new business is the Educator Value Added Assessment System, which is affectionately known as EVAS. Data update, Dr. Tomberlin.
Morning, board members. It's very nice to see most of you face to face, and I'm excited to speak with you today about EVAS reporting for the 2021 academic school year. So, as many of you know, EVAS is the vendor that creates our student growth model for the state, and I'll pause a minute to. Okay. And given the unusual nature of the 2021 school year, there are some considerations for the development of that growth measure that I would like to share with you all today. So due to the COVID-19 pandemic, North Carolina public school units did not administer state summative assessments at the end of the 2019-20 school year. Additionally, our PSUs had some difficulty administering beginning of the year assessments in the 2021 school year, such as K2 reading BOY and third grade reading BOG. And then finally, summative assessments for 2021 were very robust across the state, but were slightly down from the 95% participation rate that we shoot per year. So in order to handle the loss of assessment data from the 1920 school year, we have to employ what we call a gap year analysis for the measuring of student growth. And essentially what that means is that we will take all the students' prior testing history, as we normally do, but act like 1920 school year just did not happen. We're going to go back to the 1819 school year, the end of that school year. Any summative assessment data that we have on those students, we will use that as part of the testing history and take the information from the 2021 school year and estimate the growth of students over a 2-year span rather than a single year. So the lack of testing data does introduce some, in the 1920 school year, does introduce some error into this estimate. And so we have looked, worked with SAS, and we've done extensive scenarios and modeling of what this looks like. Essentially, what we did was we went back to the 17-18 school year, the 16-17 school year, and said, what if we calculated growth for the 18-19 school year without considering 17-18? And so we took data that we had and modeled the gap year analysis that we're experiencing now. And by doing that, we were able to see how well correlated those the growth estimates were between the gap year analysis and the single year analysis. And I can report to you that those correlations were very high. And there are some considerations that we looked at, such as, can we look at which students were with which teachers in that gap year? Even though we don't have testing data on them, we know that students were connected with certain teachers. And where we see any evidence that the students behave differently as a result of being with that teacher, we can account for that in the model, even though we don't have testing data. So I don't want to get too in the weeds with this, but essentially what we're doing here is trying to get a rough estimate of the connection between students and teachers in that gap year and incorporate that into the analysis so that our correlations are even stronger between what we would do in a single year and in the gap year. I can say that EVAS has successfully produced growth estimates in a gap year situation in other states, most notably Tennessee. It wasn't due to the pandemic at that time, but they had some issues with their assessments, and they had to do this growth model in a gap year, and that was successful. So that gives us a lot of confidence that we'll be able to do that for this year. So I'd like to talk really briefly about the measures in EVAS because that we have some further proposals for how we're going to handle the reporting of EVAS this year. So here are some examples of the EVOS measures that school districts use. And I just want to refresh your memory on these. We have school accountability growth, and that's the growth of students in specific subjects, and that is our EOGs and EOCs aggregated at the school level. This is a publicly reported EVOS measure. It's also used in a variety of other measures across the state, the school report card. It's used in the determination of low performing status and other areas. We also have teacher level growth, and this is the growth of students by grade and subject aggregated at the teacher level. We are proposing to continue on with teacher level reporting for the 2021 school year. Then there's another less common growth measure. It's called Educator Effectiveness Growth. If you'll remember back to the days of Race to the Top, we had Standard 8, which was the principal's value-added growth measure that was part of the evaluation process. That incorporates all the testing in the school. So the school accountability focused only on certain EOGs and EOCs, but the educator effectiveness growth incorporates all the testing in the school. So K2 is included, CTE is included, and any other subjects that are not in the formal accountability model. We will continue to develop that measure in the coming year. And then finally, student projections. Student projections are an estimated probability of a student's performance in the current year on a state-administered summative exam. So in the late fall, when we release EVOS, we also release these projections of how, based on the student's testing history, what is the probability that that student will perform at the proficient level or higher? That is a level 3 or higher. This measure in particular is extremely important to our school districts because they use it for a variety of instructional groupings and targeted supports for students that may appear to be struggling to meet proficiency on the upcoming EOG. So a quick review of what's in the legislation around this. So the school accountability growth model, Senate Bill 654 proposes to withhold the school accountability growth model and not include it in the following measures. 1, school report cards. 2, the determination of low performing schools. And 3, the determination of principal recruitment supplements. If these provisions, whether they're in Senate Bill 654 or some other bill, but if these provisions pass into law, NCDPI will not develop the SAG measure for the 2021 school year. We will not develop it. We will not report it within the secure site. It will just not be available for the 2021 school year. However, educator effectiveness growth and teacher growth will be developed for this school year. EVOS will develop these two measures employing the gap year approach that I previously talked about. We will notify, there is a provision within House Bill 654, and even if this is not a provision in law, the state will notify schools that this year's growth analysis there's some implications here because of the gap year analysis. And particularly what that means is notifying teachers that their growth score could contain the growth of a teacher that's not them. And that is specifically in the 1920 school year. So there was instruction and there was student growth in the 1920 school year. That's being captured in the 2021 measure. And teachers need to be aware of this and notified of this, that it's not it's not their impact solely on the student's learning. Because this measure, I don't want to suggest that these measures are not valid. We know that they are and that they're highly correlated with a single year approach. But because of this, we know that there's going to be some anxiety around this measure and a lot of confusion and questions. So the way NCDPI is proposing to handle this, the release this year, is to turn off access to teacher level reporting as the default for the state. So when you go into the secure system, teachers will not see their individual growth scores. And we would leave it to the discretion of the local PSUs, whether that's the board, that's local board that's making the decision, or the superintendent that's making the decision, that the local board would have the ability to turn it on for their own district. We don't manage that at DPI. We will inform them of how one turns it on, and we will leave it to the individual PSUs to make that decision. And last, I just want to show you really quick the student projections. These will be turned on by default. These are not about teacher performance issues or school performance. This is about students and the and our best understanding of their probability of success on the upcoming end of the year summative. So you can see here, districts are provided with charts that indicate the number of students that have a greater than 70% probability of achieving proficiency on the upcoming EOC or EOG. And then it's broken down into different categories where you can see students are identified as having less than a 40% probability of passing that test. And you can see there in the slide presentation, though that hyperlink is not active, but within the system, that is an active hyperlink that would take you to a roster of students who fall into that category. So this is very critical information for our teachers to have, to know which students need more support, may need more intervention to be successful on those upcoming EOCs and EOGs. And so we are not turning this off, and we want to make sure that all the PSUs understand that these data will be available on the release of EVOS for the coming school year. I think I just said all that. Last, I want to talk quickly about EVOS bonuses. So in Senate Bill 105, Section 7A.3G, for the 2021 fiscal year, funds that were allocated or appropriated for the following bonus programs shall be used for a one-time lump sum bonus to all teachers. And those three categories are third grade read to achieve teacher bonus, fourth and fifth grade reading teacher bonus, and fourth through eighth grade mathematics teachers bonus. So this, I want to be very clear that this bill has not passed. This is what's proposed in legislation. This is the best we know at this time. So the indication seems to be that there will not be bonuses based on these EVOS data, but we will keep folks aware, and I'm sure your legislative liaisons will keep you aware of what happens over in the General Assembly. And I'm happy to take any questions.
I suspect there will be some questions for Dr. Tumlin. Mr. Duncan.
Dr. Tomlin, if I could start with the gap year analysis. The gap years that you just described from the previous studies that give SAS some comfort, I think is the way you described it with the results, are not comparable to the gap year that we're dealing with here. The gap year we're dealing with here, students weren't even in school for 2.5 months of the gap year. And then coming back to this year, the students were not in school full time in virtually any district. Huge variances between what type of remote learning was available and the quality of that remote learning, and huge differences in the accessibility to even reach students. So I will not place very much reliability on the gap year analysis in this instance because it's different, but glad to hear whatever is out there on it. The bigger question, what's going to be released to the public out of this? If the public records request is made, what's released?
So that's a great question. So school accountability growth is a publicly reported piece of data. And so the fact that we are not developing it means that we cannot publicly report it. So if there is a FOIA request, we did not develop that measure. We don't have access to it. And so it will not be available for a public records request is my understanding, but I may be treading into legal issues. Should not be speaking about, but that's how we're planning on approaching that. All the other information, that is the teacher level value added and the educator growth, those are individual measures tied to a specific individual, and they are used as part of our evaluation process. And so they are shielded from public reporting because they are in effect evaluative of the teachers. So everything that we're reporting is contained in the secure site, and that information is protected from public access.
In terms of the school projections data, and I think you showed an example of one at the end, is that going to be publicly reportable?
No, that is in the secure site. FERPA would cover that, is my assumption, that we could not release this individual students.
Right. But
education
that
record.
looked like a collective, not an individual student.
That is collective, yes.
So is a collective going to be released as a public record?
Collectively, I suppose it could be. We don't report on that from the state level. So individual districts may get requests to see those kinds of data, those student projection data displays. I don't know whether that would be.
Well, wherever all that leads, I just want to end with this quick thought. We've got teachers who have worked remarkably hard through incredibly difficult circumstances over the course of the last 2 years. They're exhausted, they're tired, and in some sense feel underappreciated. We as a board need to be very strongly supportive of the work that they have done through this pandemic and will continue to do, it appears, as we go into the new school year. And to the extent any of this data is used as a way to criticize somebody, who just put yourself in their shoes for a moment, what they've gone through over the last 2 years, and allow this to then be used as a basis of criticism for our public schools or for our teachers who are leading those public schools and our administrative leaders, is just not acceptable. And I do want to be out in front of that wave, that this data is not a basis to start critiquing the quality of the work that's being done. It's a basis to suggest instead we have information that tells us we have a very difficult road ahead to work with our students, and we are redoubling our efforts and trying to be very thoughtful about how we bring our students back to where they are. And I do think that should be in every messaging that we have. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. That was very
I
important.
do have to say, if I may, that we always take that position, not just in a COVID year. These data are always about helping teachers grow and improve, and they're never about judgment or high stakes employment decisions.
And you know, as I do, that they're never used or interpreted that way in the public domain. And in this, and you know that as well as I do. And in this instance, it'd be particularly inappropriate to do it. So that was my point.
Sure.
I've got several hands raised. I think I'm gonna, while it's working right now, Mr. Hall, who's remote, would like to ask a question. So I'm going to go there first, and then I'll come across the table.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. It's not a question. It's, well, it is and it's not. How will these changes concerning EBOS be communicated to the school districts? It's important that they understand what it is and what is not as a result of, just like the bill that you were mentioning earlier. The next time I hear it, it'll be, where's my bonus money? That on my green achievement. How will this information be disseminated?
So that's a great question. So as far as the changes, I don't know if I characterize them as changes, but the difference in the way we're having to measure growth for this year.
Yes.
EVOS has a robust communication system within the system that can send out announcements to individual users in EVOS. So we certainly will be leveraging that communication channel to let teachers know about the implications of the gap year analysis and what they can and the kinds of inferences they can draw from the data that they're seeing in the system. Additionally, Dr. Howard, right here, has a convening of testing coordinators and school accountability personnel in the fall that we're planning on speaking to about this and making sure that those folks in the district that have the technical expertise to answer these questions, that they are fully informed about these changes and how we develop the measure for this coming year. So we're going to leverage that group to disseminate that information more broadly in the LEAs. And then I think there was a question about bonuses.
Well, right. The legislation that's being proposed, was it 91 bill? You mentioned about the bonuses would be for everybody.
That is proposed legislation.
That is correct.
The way that reads is that those funds that were used for the EVOS bonuses would be used instead to issue a one-time bonus to all teachers.
That is correct.
I think if you recall from last year, there was a similar provision, and I have not communicated any of that to the field because this is proposed legislation, and I generally don't comment until I know something for sure when I talk to teachers.
I fully understand. I thank you for that position that you've taken. But I can assure you that someone's already heard about bonuses. But it's only proposed.
It's only for?
It's only being proposed. It's not law.
That is correct. Right now it is proposed.
Correct. And my concern is that get misinterpreted out there in the field if it's not clearly stated. You understand where I'm coming from with that?
I do, and I can assure you that that once we know that there's a final decision has been made about the disposition of those bonuses, that we will communicate that broadly with the field.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, absolutely.
Ms. Stover.
So as a teacher who uses the EVOS data, I appreciate all the work you've put in to ensure that that data will still be available for teachers this year. But to echo Vice Chair Duncan's comments, I know that maybe at the state level, that effectiveness measure for teachers is not considered to be something that's used frequently. At the site and local levels, it is. Is there a way that we could turn off the red teacher or the teacher that's not met growth? Right now, it's if you're -2 to +2, you meet growth. If you're above 2, you exceed growth. And if you're below -2, then you did not meet growth. Is there a way to turn off the did not meet growth measure so that we would only see teachers in the green or blue, and therefore they wouldn't feel like they had not done a good job that year, especially considering that some of the data may include instruction that was not instruction that they had given those students?
Unfortunately, there's not. It would have to be an all or nothing decision on the part of the LEA or the charter school to either turn it all on or turn it all off. But certainly they can leave it masked, and they can download information out of the system and differentially advise some teachers about how they did and not provide that information to others. It is our hope that they will use these data from this year with the sensitivity that Vice Chair Duncan expressed. But certainly we don't have control over how the districts use that information in terms of decisions they make about teacher placement and high stakes employment decisions. We highly discourage that, but that is the purview of the local Board of Education and the administration of those local districts. We don't have any authority in that area. Sorry.
Thank you. Ms. Clemens.
Yes. Dr. Tomlin, you said something, and I'm not even sure how to phrase this question, but you were talking about the gap analysis and you didn't want to get in the weeds, but you said something, I think, about how even without the data, we can kind of see how students responded to the teacher that they had the previous, like the 1920 year. Like how do we, what is that and how do we know that?
Great question. And so what we have from the 1920 school year is enrollment data. So we know certain students were connected with certain teachers. It's not as granular as the roster verification data, but we know certain students were with certain teachers. So as those students that were in a teacher's class in the 1920 school year move out into the 2021, they're going to be in a lot of different teachers. But what we're able to do is say, okay, all these students, we could look at all these students, and they may not have progressed as much as we thought they should have. And it just so happens they may all be tied back to a teacher in the prior year. And where you see that, you can make some adjustments in the model to account for the lower growth that was attributed that the students experienced in the prior year. Now, these are small adjustments. I don't want to suggest that it's going to change the whole game, but where we see those students collected with a certain teacher and they are trending all in the same direction, that gives us information that we can use in modifying the growth for the teacher of the current year.
And I just had a second kind of question, reiterating a little bit of what Vice Chair Duncan and Ms. Stover had said. So I'm thinking about in the field, the work that we traditionally do with EVOS, which we invest a lot of time in looking through that data. And EVOS doesn't always give us, answers, but it helps us to ask the questions about our instructional practices. And so one of, my concerns is thinking, how are we going to beyond the student projections? How would I, as a principal, lead and facilitate and help my teachers use the educator's effectiveness? Because if right off the bat, we know that some part of those calculations do not represent the teacher and their instruction, then how do you go from there? So I'm just trying to wrap my head around, how are we going to really use this? How is this going to be beneficial for teaching and learning?
So one of the things that we need to remember about this particular year that's different from other situations. So the COVID pandemic was a systemic shock to the system. In prior years, we've had hurricanes. Those are random shocks to the system. So they affect one group of folks, and that's over here, but it's isolated from the rest of the state. This was uniform across the state. Everybody had the experience of the pandemic. And so, but as Vice Chair Duncan pointed out, those responses to the pandemic were not equivalent across all districts. So what one would want to do here is, when you're looking at the EVOS growth in a school, then you can be even more confident that those conditions were more similar for all teachers in the school than they were between one school and another school, or from one district to another district. And so the information you glean, and again, this is not about criticizing or judging anyone, but if you have two teachers teaching fifth grade math, and you know as the principal that they were operating under similar conditions, and let's say that's remote conditions with limited student access to get online, and you know they were both experiencing the same response from COVID-19, and one showing really high growth and one showing the other, that is an opportunity for the principal to think of, how can I support this other teacher? Clearly, the online instruction delivery was more challenging for this teacher. How can I support that teacher? What are some resources I can provide that would help make that online delivery more successful? Because as we approach the school year, we don't know if that's going to be an issue again for our teachers. And so that's the kind of information that I think is valuable for school districts. The within school examination of how our teachers did in those circumstances, that's going to have a much more uniform effect of COVID than if you're looking from between schools or between districts. And that's what I would avoid, is comparison across schools or across districts for this coming year.
Well, thank you for all the information.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ms. White?
To make an Olympic comparison, this is sort of like tossing an Olympic swimmer in the open sea with high winds and heavy surf and expecting the qualifying time to be the same. And that's just not going to happen. But to emphasize a positive, one of the things at the school level that may come out of this data, if we're forced back into a remote learning situation, is that those school leaders can look at that data and see which teachers did really well with cohorts of students in the past year and identify those teachers, particularly in math. Okay, this is my math team, and use those folks for math only. And if you did really well in English language arts, then you could select those teachers to do the remote learning piece in language arts. So it is a way to identify teachers who had success in the midst of adversity to offer quality instruction, as well as give support to those who need the support.
Thank you. One more question, I believe, from Dr. Emery is, and then we'll move on because we are running way over time here. Dr. Emery.
Thank you, Chair Camden's Bev Emery here. And I just wanted to make an offer here, sort of spontaneity based on listening to this presentation. Given that most of us are used to working with EVOS data and we understand this is just another layer of complexity, would just offer, if we wanted to use our regional directors and teams, because we have accountability folks on those teams and others who might work with Dr. Tomerlin, Dr. Edmonds on some way to help share this or push it out or be a resource to districts. So the kinds of questions that have been asked here, we can certainly contemplate from the field, and that we would be prepared to give them some ready access to support and answers, and even training if needed, to make the best use of this sort of amended look at growth.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Emery. And SAS and I will be reaching out to the regional directors soon to schedule trainings for each of the regions. We always leave it up to you to define what the topics are for those regions. So if it's about this particular gap year analysis and how to use the data successfully in the coming school year, we can certainly do that.
That's an excellent suggestion to end with. So thank you very much, Dr. Tomberlin. Obviously, this was quite an interesting discussion. And I think that back to Vice Chair Duncan's comments and that what we also heard from across the table, we just all need to be mindful of Amy's example of the swimmer thrown into the deep ocean and expected to perform the same way as he did in a pool. So we'll just have to lift that up as we go through this coming year and as we get more opportunities to talk about what we can learn from the accountability from last year. So moving on to actions on first read. SLA 1, contracts over $500,000, Voyager Cypress letters. This is going to be Dr. Ryan, but I have to say just quickly before she begins, I am very disappointed to tell you that we will not be taking action on this contract tomorrow. Unfortunately, the contracting process is not yet complete, so the important work of giving our teachers the tools they need to align their reading instruction with the science of reading will have to be delayed. This board, the superintendent, and the staff at DPI have worked hard towards this end, and we recognize the urgency of this work. So as soon as the contracting process is complete, we will ask for a called meeting to consider action on this contract. That being said, Dr. Ryan, quickly take us through what this is going to look like.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. And so just an overview, really. Good morning, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Truitt, Lieutenant Governor Robinson, members of the board, colleagues and stakeholders. And I would love to be here presenting this contract award today. Unfortunately, as Ms. Kamnitz had shared, we are still waiting to hear back from DIT. So just a reminder that I think the first slide basically was just an overview of what you've seen before. But if you look at our first cohort, that's perfect, Deanna. The summer and fall cohort. Obviously, we're not going to be able to do anything in the summer. Summer is over. So we are looking at fall. That will not change the ending timeline for cohort 1. We don't have to worry about that. But it may shift when they finish volume 1, units 1 and 2, for example. We hope they would be finished by the first semester, and then they could start that second part the second semester. But unfortunately, if it's a 16-week process, it may go into early January for those particular districts. That would only take them, instead of them finishing up as we had hoped in the spring, it may take them a couple weeks into their summer or early summer before they get out in work days. We won't know that until we finalize the time and the contract. And then once Voyager Cypress reaches out, we'll see what days each district has available. But all that's up in the air because they can't reach out and contact and start making those plans with districts based on their calendars until that contract is finalized. They are ready to push a button the minute it comes and it's approved. We've done a lot of work behind the scenes so that it moves rapidly once, and we can execute that quickly, expedite that process. So it's not changed our cohorts. They have stayed the same. It will not impact, should not impact cohort 2 or 3 at all. So that's good news. And as of today, our team basically, we turned the best and final offer to DIT on July 27th. We had not heard back, but our team reached out today and they said they are working quickly to get us some answers as well. So as soon as we have that information, we will get back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Ryan. Unless there's a burning question, I think we all are familiar with how critical this work is, and I'm sure everyone shares the sense of frustration I have, and I'm sure Dr. Ryan has, that we are not able to begin yet, but soon, hopefully. And I think our next SLA2 is also Dr. Ryan, SB Policy Amendment 2021-22 Read to Achieve Implementation Guide. Read to Achieve legislation requires that we develop a complete plan for comprehensive reading achievement. And Dr. Ryan's going to explain the timeline for the revision of this guide and then present the first few sections for our approval.
Okay, so this is an overview, as Ms. Kamnitz had said, of the 21-22 Read to Achieve Implementation Guide, and it's outlining General Statutes 115C 83.1 through 83.11, as well as KNEC policies 002, 003, and 017. Hopefully in your resources, you have a copy of this implementation guide, and I hope the first thing you noticed is the new look. So we have intentionally taken time to think about what that might look like. We are highlighting the importance of early literacy across North Carolina, but not only early literacy, because it doesn't stop there, but a huge emphasis on literacy across the continuum for our students. After working with our communications team, capturing input from a few stakeholders, we tried to create a logo that depicts the importance of long-term, high-quality literacy instruction. If you'll notice, the rising sun behind in the image actually depicts a new era of where we are focusing on science of reading across our state to refocus on how we are teaching reading to all of our students in the early ages. And you'll also notice that hopefully that the books kind of get higher as you go. So it's referring or referencing the continuum of where we start with those foundational skills and continue to build. And then you'll notice the graduate profile who is reaching for the star, basically recognizing that the sky is the limit for those students, and also referring back to Superintendent's North Star, as well as the work that's happening with Operation Polaris. And if you'll notice the book that the graduate is standing on, there is a different kind of logo there or image. Anybody know what that is?
It's our state.
It's our state. So as we are moving forward, this would represent our state. At the bottom, you have a logo that says Read, Lead, Succeed. Superintendent Truitt states it best in the implementation guide. We know that when students learn to read, they are better prepared to lead and to succeed. Reading proficiency provides the foundation for future success, and each of you will be facilitators of this incredible process. Strong and confident readers create resilient leaders with bright futures. So we started the implementation guide with this particular and logo that you'll see hopefully in the future in lots of different ways. So the purpose of the implementation guide is to provide a reference with supporting resources in one location with updates from Senate Bill 387. The implementation guide is a bit different from your past guides and what you have seen. The updated Excellent Public Schools Act spans over a period of 4 years with a deployment cycle spanning out to 2025. While this timeline is long-term, there are components within legislation that are effective now. For example, the Read to Achieve beginning of year assessments have already started in many of our schools that are in progress. And so as we look at those specific components, we thought it important to go ahead and make sure that they have access and support to the resources now as they are beginning, while we also will be adding to the implementation guide and coming back to the state board each month with those new components. We would not do anything without your approval as we add and edit those updates. This resource that is up here now is actually a timeline for our PSUs and our LEAs. It's kind of broken down so that they have a checklist, if you will, where they can monitor and keep up with those dates and timelines, because it can get a little confusing, as you will see as we go throughout the presentation. So as you, if we will, let's go ahead and take a walk through it. You'll have the first section, which is our introduction. And included in the introduction right now is your PSU timeline, which I just mentioned, the superintendent's letter, alignment to our State Board of Ed goals, collaborative guiding framework, and Operation Polaris Literacy Task Force work. North Carolina early literacy data and the NAEP data is included, as well as a science of reading overview and the purpose for each of those sections within the guide. Section 1 includes what you might have seen before in your tables. where it has roles and responsibilities, kind of an overview broken down with a quick reference guide, which can be a little tedious, but it is the work at a glance for those who want to look at it that way. But we've tried to align each of the sections from here on out with the sections in the actual legislation. So when someone's looking at legislation, they can also look specifically at that section in the implementation guide, and there'll be alignment there. Section 2 is your Science of Reading overview. We'll continue to add resources and information there as needed, but with your approval first. Section 3, the Early Literacy Implementation Guide progression is included here. This is where we will house the information for Voyager, SOPRS, and letters. What's included right now is basically just the legislation and the process for as far as what's going to happen, as well as resources that we pulled from the comprehensive reading plan. It's included in this section. Any resources that have to do with professional development. And it also begins to focus on our preschool through K alignment. Since we have a formative assessment in place, you'll notice at the bottom left, which is what's going to show up in yourself, it's highlighted, that the pre-K resources are in progress and will be available in September. So we'll come back to the board in September to present that section to ask if we can add it to the implementation guide. Section 4 focuses on our Ed Prep program. And right now there's a lot of information in there as far as the UNC system, the literacy framework. But we haven't included it yet, but we also have been working with our community colleges, our independent colleges and universities. And so while they have been actively engaged, as we continue to work with them and they advance forward, we will continue to add information here as well. Dr. Bill Barberry and her team have been absolutely amazing to work with as far as this alignment, and they are that they will have some of their schools trained in letters. And the way this works now is there's a renewal cycle for colleges and universities as they go through their accreditation process. But there are some that have been identified, about 5 or 6 that have been identified, that will participate in a pilot so that they are working closely with an assigned district or school with their student teachers and the trainers having the same training. So, Section 5. So this highlights the timeline for implementation of our literacy instruction standards and the process overview. Keep in mind the term standards in this legislation is not referencing standard course of study. It's actually emphasizing the consistent, systematic, and systemic statewide literacy instruction best practices and guidelines that we should see happening in schools. Dr. Day and her team have actually been amazing to work with and have taken the lead on this particular piece or this section and closely collaborated with us along the way. Unfortunately, we determined that when we were looking at the legislative timeline, however, Section 5 and 6 seemed to be a little backwards. The interventions and the literacy intervention standards were due before the literacy instruction standards, which meant we were going to provide guidance on Tier 2 and 3 and how you're working on closing gaps before we were providing guidance on core, which is Tier 1. And so Dr. Day and her team are expediting the process and working closely with our representatives in Section 6, and they have pushed their timeline up to October so that it matches, because we do not want to confuse the field as we are rolling out this and we're aligning it to MTSS practices that are already in place. We also have Susan Laney, who is representing Section 6 and IAB's division as well. So kudos to their team, because theirs is not actually due until March, but they're going to expedite and work alongside so that when the information goes out, that we will focus on standards for core 2 and 3. EC will be pulled into that as well. Section 6, believe it or not, this is the one that gives us the heartburn because there is so much information in this section. As I mentioned, it focuses on those literacy intervention standards. But keep in mind too, in this new legislation, the literacy intervention standards also include our reading camps. Reading camps are considered an intervention in this new legislation. It also includes a lot of your old processes that have not changed as far as your good cause exemptions, a student who is not proficient, their pathways, their opportunities for that. There is one section that has us looking at current practices to see what's working, what's not working, and use those in making decisions regarding those literacy intervention standards. That will come back before the board as well in October. And a shout out to IABS for their involvement in this process alongside us as well. Section 7 focuses on our reading camp signing bonuses. performance bonuses, and continuing education credits. And this is pretty much just the legislation in this piece. There's not been anything additional added. If we have additions, we'll bring that before you. Section 8 will come back in basically December or January. This is our children's reading initiative, and that's not due in the timeline for legislation until January 15th of 2022. Section 9 focuses on assessments, and it references our Carolina Learning Inventory, Early Learning Inventory, NC-ELI, as well as the alignment between pre-K and K this year, and both pre-K or preschools and kindergarten will be taking that teaching strategies goal, because part of the legislation requires us at the end of the year to transfer that information from our preschools to our kindergarten, which is amazing, so that we have that information. That's smoother transition there. It also focuses on EC alternative assessments, which we will be adding when we bring that back with input from Sherry Thomas's division. And then one major change in this section that will come before the board in October pertains to the State Board of Ed approval of only one alternative assessment. That's different than what we've had in the past. Typically, there's a list of vendors. They fill up, they go through this process. They're vetted to see if they do align and if they could be selected as an alternative assessment for an optional pathway for third grade students. This legislation says now you will have one diagnostic alternative assessment starting in 22-23. And then we would still have our Dr. Howard's team works on testing accountability as far as that read to achieve assessment. That's a different piece. Section 10 emphasizes the updated reporting requirements. They are asking for an enhanced template that includes more information and more data. So we have a team working on that, starting to look at that, and we'll work with Tom Tomberlin section to make sure that we're not leaking as far as data reporting. Once we have created that template, we will. It also requires that we go back and add all data from 2014 until now into the template to make sure that we present that all one place, kind of looking for trends. October, we have a lot for October. And then the last two sections, which wouldn't necessarily be in legislation per se or aligned to any sections in legislation, are your glossary, which comes directly from legislative terms and definitions. And then section 12, your final section, is your appendices that we'll continue to add to and bring back for any types of approval moving forward as far as policies and so forth. The one thing we will have to look at in section 12 with the KNEC policies is possibly taking that before rules to make sure they are in alignment with the new legislation. So that's another piece we have to consider too. And finally, that was a quick bird's eye view. If you implementation guide, please be reminded we are only asking board members to review and approve what is created today in the August version of the 21-22 implementation guide. We will waiting to approve a final version of this year. When all the components of legislation are complete is far too late for our practitioners. Our goal is to avoid making the checklist. The only thing we would ask is if we find a typo or an admitted that we could go ahead and edit that. We would not change any content without your approval.
So, thank you, Dr. Ryan. Questions for Dr. Ryan? Vice Chair Duncan.
Are the numbers used there correspond with the Roman numerals used in our materials?
They should be.
So are we being asked to approve 1, 2, 3, and 9 today or tomorrow?
No, you should be. We're asking that you approve whatever is in each of those sections. We sent an updated executive summary asking that you approve all sections as they are, with the notes that say this will not be back. This is not being requested for approval. It will be reviewed in October or in September.
Let me frame the question this way then to help me. There would be a body of thought in some instances that you would want the whole product before you voted for it. That would be, I think, for those who think chronologically, they tend to probably think that way. But there could be other instances where the material that's finalized is so important to get out to the field that you would do it piecemeal. Can you do either of those apply, or can you give me some framework as to why we would approve without having the entirety of the document? or the work?
So if we wait to approve the entire document, this implementation guide will not go out to the field until possibly February. Schools have already started. There's content materials in here now and resources that they need to help them understand the new legislation. And they wouldn't have access to that until January, February. We can continue to piecemeal and send memos, but we are surveying them to death and we're trying to stop. They need that in one place, and that's the feedback we continue to get from some of our regions, is that, when you're sending bits and pieces of things, it gets confusing. But it makes perfect sense. It's the timeline of the legislation versus the timeline of the approval school starts that they conflict.
I think that's another layer here, is that there are timelines in the legislation as well. So some pieces have to be reported sooner than others that all are a part of this guide. Did I say that correctly?
Absolutely.
I think it may be difficult for the districts regardless at this point of how it comes, whether by memos or whether piecemeal with the plan. But I understand that you've been very helpful in describing the situation. Thank you for that, Dr. Ryan.
Other questions?
I have a quick question, Ms. Kamnitz. Somewhat tied to Mr. Duncan's question, I'm going to pivot straight to the classroom for a minute, if you will allow me to get that practical. Where in the material that we are going to approve will the classroom teacher understand from theory to practice the science of reading, how to instruct it?
So that falls within section 3. So 2 is your overview. Section 2 is the overview, and 3 is actually some of the resources that they would have. Yep, it's kind of like the comprehensive reading plan. It will be a part of this particular implementation guide. So section 3. Now, there are other resources, the appendices, some of those things that will come into play as well.
So they're going to get, and they do need that.
Yes.
Definitely. All right, that sounds good. That answers my question.
All right, thank you. In the interest of time, I don't see any other questions, let's move on. Thank you, Dr. Ryan. Finally, we have an action item, SLA 3, standard setting recommendations for reading and NC Extend 1 science, which is Dr. Howard. Last month, Dr. Howard outlined the need for this action as well as the process that was followed. Today, she has the recommendations for both academic descriptors and scale scores. I would like to clarify for the board and those listening that our conversation today is about standard setting. The implementation process requires the assessment which was developed and administered in the 2021 school year. We will have our deeper conversation about what the data from that assessment tells us about student achievement last year when we receive the learning loss restart report in a future meeting. So please let's focus on standard setting today. Dr. Howard.
Say good morning. But to begin with, just a reminder, of course, that standard setting is, of course, using the content standards that are adopted by this board to then determine judgments of where students are located per the academic achievement levels. And critical to this work, of course, is what we call the policy descriptors. So the policy descriptors were adopted by the board, if you recall, summer of 2019 with the new mathematics assessments. Once policy descriptors are adopted, they then remain in place for all assessments going forward until at which time the board has reason to revisit those policy descriptors. So in the PowerPoint, it's very helpful to just notice the policy descriptors for both the general assessments and also for the NC Extend 1 assessments. Those policy descriptors really form the foundation, the basis for which the teachers who serve as panelists in this process do their work. They're constantly coming back to ask themselves the question, what does it mean to be identified as level 5, level 4, level 3, and not proficient for the general, and level 4, 3, not proficient for the alternate assessment. So in preparing for the standard setting workshop, our lead psychometrician, Dr. Kinga Mabella, worked very closely with our North Carolina technical advisors, who I have mentioned before are nationally recognized experts in testing and accountability. And we're also very fortunate to have a member that is really the recognized expert in standard setting as one of our technical advisors. Also, we contracted with Data Recognition Corporation because this work is externally facilitated. We, as department members, do not lead those conversations. We give a general welcome, we give a general thank you, and other than that, we are in the background. Arranging for that contract was led by Maxie Moore, who is Section Chief for Test Development, and she worked very hard to make sure that everything was a go for this face-to-face standard setting, which I'm sure you can appreciate the challenge of doing that. We also retained Dr. Gregory Cizik, who is a professor at UNC Chapel Hill. He is the renowned expert in standard setting, and he was there as an external facilitator. So he was in all of the rooms, listening to the conversation, looking at the methodology. And his purpose is to be able to give us feedback on things we can do in the future, but more importantly than that, to look at the process that occurred at this workshop. It's held July 12th through 16th, and to say from a methodology perspective, from a research perspective, everything was conducted by standards to where we can then recommend achievement level scores. So on slide 6, we have the demographics for the panelists. And all of the work that we do in testing, we try very hard to make sure that we're always representative of the North Carolina state population. You can see here the problem that we have in doing this is around male and female. That continues to be a problem. We're always very appreciative of the participating males. Very hard to get that number up, but we are mindful, trying to make sure that those panelists reflect the state and also have a high level of experience with the content standards. And you can see 51% had 16 or more years of experience and 63% had a master's degree or higher. So that is extremely as well. The actual process for standard setting, these are the 4 key steps that have to happen. Drafting the academic achievement level descriptors, that is part of what you are adopting potentially tomorrow. Those were drafted prior to the workshops, and the panelists could, just like with the policy descriptors, use those descriptors, which are really finite examples of what students at each academic achievement level can do. The bulk of the panelists workshop is the second step, which is defining the threshold criteria for students and then making that recommendation for that cut. Now, their work is grounded around the content standards, and the items are from the assessment is what they are looking at. That is what they use to ask themselves in a very simplified explanation for a content item on assessments. Would a student get this item correct or would they not? And the process then, it lays over all of the academic achievement so that we then have recommendation from the panelists. There is then a vertical articulation step and a technical review as well. That leads us to today, where we come with the final recommendation. It's very important to note that the range of possible recommendations at each level was reviewed with consistency, with grade level expectation, and with impact. Those recommendations are adjusted within the range of the participant's threshold to account for judgment and measurement error. So what we are presenting today are the following: the achievement level descriptors and the scale scores, particularly for grades 3 through 8, that is the general assessments. And then also for the NC Extend 1, that is our alternate assessment for reading, as well as for English 2. You may remember last summer, we recommended and you adopted academic achievement levels for English 2, the general assessment. We were unable to do the alternate assessment for English 2 because of COVID, spring of 2020. So that is why it's a little bit behind. And also you'll see that we're also presenting for science. A clarification there, that is because with the mathematics assessments that were implemented in 2018-19, our team redesigned our NC Extend 1 alternate assessments, partly based on feedback from the U.S. Department of Education through our peer review process. So anytime we redesign a test, we then go back to standard setting. So we carried that design for the mathematics to the reading, and then to have everything in alignment for those students, we then did the same thing for science. So with this recommendation today, there's a couple of really great things happening. One, the NC Extend 1 assessments will all be aligned. And two, remember our many conversations about level 3. We no longer will have that level 3 that was really based on a standard error from the 2012-13 data. We now have solid academic achievement levels, recommendations, nomenclature of 4 levels for the general assessment. So remember, these recommendations are based on what students can do with respect to the content standards. And that is the conversation the teachers had in this process. We survey, or I should say, data recognition coalition. They survey the teachers from the moment they walk in the room until the last thing they do before they walk out the last time. They survey them through the process, asking them how comfortable they feel with the process. Do they feel like their voices are being heard? Do they feel like they can contribute to the conversation? How confident they feel of the recommendation that they're giving. And so we then review those surveys, and that is a point of validation in making this recommendation to you. And we can say strongly that surveys do support. The last slide before we look at the actual recommendation is a quote from our external evaluator, Dr. Gregory Cizik. See his quote here, and we would just stress that he says policymakers can have confidence that the recommendations from the standard setting activity are based on sound procedures, producing credible, defensible, and educationally useful results. And the next step for us as test developers is that we will then have to present all of this evidence to the U.S. Department of Education for their review. It does not in any way interfere with our timeline as a state, but nevertheless, just to share that we are reviewed externally again by the U.S. Department of Education. They will then give their stamp of approval again on the methodology. You, as the board, have the authority to adopt the cuts. So if you'll look at this slide, we'll begin with general EOG reading. And in this chart on the very far left, you can see that we have each of the grade levels 3 through 8. And then we have the recommended cut score. So that is the scale score that would then define that academic achievement level. And then the last 4 columns, that is what we call impact data. So that is looking at the potential if these cuts are adopted, then this would be the impact 2020-21 data for the assessments. And the next slide shows this a little bit more graphically appealing. You can see it more across the board. Colors, you can see there at the very top, 5, then level 4, level 3, and then of course the not proficient. Next, we have the N6-N1, and the top, of course, is the reading for N6-N1, and it's the same order of information that we had on the previous slide. At the bottom, of course, this is the recommendation for science, grades 5 and 8 biology, and then, of course, just to stress, this is N6-N1. And we have a graphic that shows all of this together, first 3 through 8, N6-N1. The next slide shows grades 5 and 8 in biology. So our next steps, once and if these recommendations are adopted, we will provide individual student reports to public school units who will distribute these to parents. So parents do not know what their students scored on these assessments from spring of 2020. We will also prepare state test reports, and as Ms. Kamitz mentioned, the September board meeting will be presenting all of the test data from the 2021 school year for your review. And then one last note, given the circumstances of 2020-21, we will do a technical validation data spring of 2022, or I should say summer of 2022. So once this upcoming school year administrations are all complete, our psychometricians will go back through. They may actually also, part of this validation process, bring in teachers for additional input. But nevertheless, we will look at that data. But I will also stress that our psychometricians, led by Dr. Mabella, they do very, very detailed work. They're always looking at the test data to make sure it's holding and there are not anomalies, that there are not skewedness, that there are not things that have happened, should not have happened. So that always occurs but we'll be looking a little bit more closely at this in summer of 2022. Questions?
We are running quite over, so please be as succinct and as you can with your questions. If there are any.
Ms. Candace?
Oh, yes, Ms. Deborah.
So I did just have one question really quickly. As a biology EOC teacher, I'm wondering if there's a way that we could change the phrasing or have some way that we could communicate to parents, other adults, stakeholders, and the students that that college ready piece, that if the student does not achieve a level 4 or a level 5 or on the extended a level 4, that does not indicate that their student would not be able to go to college and be successful. That this is one test that a student takes on one day, and that does not dictate whether or not they're really ready to go to college. I know teachers have those discussions individually with the stakeholders, with the students, and with their adults, but I'm just wondering if there's a way that we could somehow communicate that on a broader scale to help help the students understand that if they did not do well on an EOC or an EOG, that does not indicate that they would not be successful at the college level.
We appreciate that comment, and just to know that that is a consistent comment we see from this board and from others, is concern about that on the individual student report, that it says yes or no, your student is on track for college and career. So we're always having conversations internally, trying to come up with better language, trying to modify it, trying to be more opening and more welcoming. As you well know, we are developing innovative assessments moving forward. We're doing that. We're also redoing those individual student reports, and we are continuing to have that conversation. I will share just really quickly, the part of the emphasis on the college standard is, you remember, that's level 4 and 5. So that is the expectation, that is the requirement in federal law. The level 3, which is grade level proficiency, that is really more of a state, a North Carolina indication. So anything we do federally, when they come and review our materials, because, peer review with the U.S. Department of Education, they're looking for those words, and they're looking that we identified college career readiness expectations, and they're also looking to see if we have told parents that. I agree we need to find a much better way to do it, and we will continue to do that in around a podcast or a FAQ, something that is parent friendly. Part of what we're trying to say, which is, let's lift students up. Let's don't just overburden them, that individual student report. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Howard. And before I get to the consent items, I'd like to just go back to SLA 2 quickly, based on Vice Chair Duncan's question, and point out that if you look in your board materials, what we're actually approving is the version of the guide, which is one of the attachments in the agenda. So that is what we are actually voting on to approve in its entirety. I think it's 83 pages. And that's what we're approving. Quickly, consent items, we have 5. SLA 4 is a report to the governor and the General Assembly, ensure the security of student records. This is a routine required report which contains no substantive change. 4 high school accreditation recommendations, which we've been seeing fairly regularly lately. These are all from Stokes County. SLA 5 is South Stokes High School. SLA 6 is Stokes Early College High School. SLA 7 is West Stokes High School. And SLA 8 is North Stokes High School. And that will conclude the SLA committee business. Chair Davis.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. We'll now move to the Healthy Responsible Students Committee, chaired by Mr. Reginald Keenan. Mr. Keenan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Reginald Keenan, Chair of the HRS Committee, along with Vice Chair Alan Duncan. And Mr. Chair, today we have one new business item, and that will be a whole child update. And Dr. Essett will carry us through that to discuss that matter. Dr. Essett.
Thank you, Mr. Keenan. Good afternoon. Yes, right on it, I believe. Vice Chair Duncan, Chairman Davis, and Superintendent Truitt, nice to be here and share an update on where we are with some of the work around school, whole community, whole child for you. So just to give you an overview of what we'll talk about today, and there are tons of initiatives going on around the agency that help support this work. We're just going to talk about 4 of them today. specifically the Youth Risk Behavior Survey and your request to expand that work, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Your request to expand the Title V or to re-accept funding for Title V. We'll talk and give you an overview of the whole child pilots, and then we'll provide some updates on our hopes for whole child NC moving forward. So obviously, and we always center all our work in the whole school, whole community, whole child framework. We know that healthy children learn better, and that evidence-based, effectively coordinated school health efforts within the context of the whole school, whole community, whole child model are necessary for closing achievement gaps, which impact absenteeism, graduation rates, as well as setting students up for success in the workforce and in college. So this is important work, and we appreciate your commitment to it. Obviously, it aligns with your strategic goals for the board, including increasing the number of school-based mental health professionals, increasing opportunities to develop healthy habits in students, and then increasing the number of students who innovate breakfast after the bell or other nutrition programs. It also aligns with that West Ed report and recommendations for addressing the non-academic barriers to student success. And then I noticed there's some new members since the last time I've been here. Nice to meet you all. Just a review of some of the work of the board in the past. In 2016, the board passed a resolution establishing the whole school, whole community, whole child framework as a model for the state board and for our LEAs. Then if we moved on to 2019, you passed a resolution to support school meals as part of the instructional day. And then finally, in September of 2020, the board passed the equity resolution. And if we take all of these things and we put them in a hat together and pull them out, there's some really common threads that come out of this work. And those are that the students at the center, that we're focusing on health and health equity, and also that the community plays a significant role in this work. We also know that data drives the work. You can look at all these data sources listed here. This is data all collected in some way by the department. And there's tons of data sources, and we need all these because they help us tell the story of what's happening to our students. The particular one we'll talk about today is the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. And just a reminder, and for those folks who may not know about the survey either in the audience or here on the board, it is a survey that's conducted in middle and high schools in odd number years. It's been done since 1993, so we have a long history of data. Also, all schools and classes are randomly selected, and I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Participation is voluntary, both at the school level and at the student level. Parental consent is required for the survey, and it's designed to be completed in one class period, and it's completely anonymous, so no identifying information of students is collected. These are the priority health risk behaviors that are assessed using the survey, and these are the behaviors that are most likely to contribute to mortality and morbidity of our students, and that's why these particular content areas are chosen. But I think what's most important about the survey to remember is this is an opportunity for our students to have a voice. We have a lot of data sources that talk about students. This is a data source where students do the talking, and they tell us what their health behaviors are and what they need. Some of you will remember that our pilot districts, we have been oversampling them to get county level data for the last few cycles of the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. The counties in green, the districts in green, are those in our pilots who have been receiving county data now for, this will be the third cycle. Those in blue are districts that have asked us to be oversampled and to get their county level data. And then in January, you all asked us to get data for all our districts, and we took that to our funder and said, can we do it? And they said, no, it's overwhelming. That much data is a lot. So what they did agree to help us with is to pull data or to collect data for all of the state board education districts. So each of your district areas, your regions, will get an oversample to tell you what the students are like in your region at the end of December, hopefully. So to tell you where we are with this work right now in the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, we have selected a vendor, and they've been working tirelessly. The samples have been drawn for all the selected schools. 722 schools have been selected to be part of this work. Classes are being selected right now. It's a random process, and they are selected, the classes within the schools. Packets are being put together that have permission slips, login information for the students, letters of support. And then finally, we'll begin the survey in early September with hopes of being completed by December of 2021. So I want to take just a minute and show you how we use the data, what's some of the information that we receive, and how do we use that. Obviously, we collect data, and all this data will be from our high school students, just so to give you a frame of reference. So we ask students, this is a percentage of high school students who did not go to school because they felt unsafe at school, on their way to school, or on their way home from school. And if you look at those numbers since 2015, we've had a significant increase in all of our students not feeling safe. And we've been working with our partners in the Center for Safer Schools and talking about strategies that we can use to address this lack of safety that some of our students are feeling. We can also look at this same piece of data based on race and ethnicity. So if you see the next slide, you'll see that while our Hispanic students have the highest levels of feeling unsafe, which is that green line at the top, every single race and ethnic group that we survey says that they're feeling less safe at school. So again, it tells us we need to do some work here, and we really need to focus on what's going on with these students and how can we address these needs. We also look at data on sex, females and males. This is the percentage of high school students who strongly agree that they feel good about themselves. And what you can see there, that both our males and females are gradually not feeling as good about themselves as they had been in the past. But it's more of a significant issue for our females. So again, helps us create strategies and prevention efforts for our students.
Totally agree.
We also look at our data by sexual orientation. This is a percentage of high school students who seriously considered attempting suicide during the 12 months before the survey. And some of you have seen this slide in different formats before, but what you see there is that our gay, lesbian, and bisexual students are almost 3 times higher in their that they've seriously considered suicide in the past 12 months, and that's an awful statistic, and it's something that we need to continue to work to address. We also ask students about their grades. We ask them if they make mostly A's, B's, C's, or D's. And what you can see from this slide from 2013 to 2019 is that 53% of our students who make mostly D's and F's said that they felt so sad or hopeless for almost every day for 2 weeks before the survey that they didn't participate in their normal activities, which is a definition of depression. So we've seen an increase not only in our students who make D's and F's, but if you look at those lines, every grade, whether they make A's, B's, C's, or D's, all had an increase in depression since 2013. We can also look at data as how it compares to other data. So this is the top line, the green line, is the percentage of high school students who were physically active at least 60 minutes per day on 5 or more days before the survey. If you look at that, and we've shown this to the board before with our Healthy Active Children policy, that's gone down. We have fewer students being physically active. If you look at the bottom line, that's the students who are depressed, and we've seen that line go up. Research tells us that physical activity helps us deal with depression. So one of the strategies we might want to think about as we move forward with our work is trying to increase even more the physical activity that our students get at school. You know, we have the Healthy Active Children policy that addresses K through 8, but that doesn't extend to high school. So getting our high school students more physically active, while it won't replace the very strong need we have for school mental health professionals to address our students' mental health needs, it can help, and we want to do everything we can to address this concern. Can't remember this one. So that's just an overview of the different ways we can use the data and how we can disaggregate the data to give us information that helps us plan. It helps our partners plan moving forward. And we should have, after December, more data for you all too about your individual regions. Title V funding, we did reapply for and accept Title V funding, and like our other work, there's some common threads with the board. Again, it's very student-centered. It's around the health of our students. Also, there's that focus on our specialized instructional support personnel and mental health personnel. And it also focuses quite a bit on our collaboration with external partners. Just an overview, this year we received around $2.3 million for Title V. This work will begin on October 1st of this coming year. We will fund approximately 16 to 17 LEAs with funds. We're still working on that formula. We have it together, but we have not selected those LEAs yet. Once selected, we'll bring them back to you. But they will be selected on a variety of different data points. We also will have 2 new positions funded. One is a reproductive health position that will take the place of our previous position that we lost when the funding went away for a year. And then we'll have a new position that's a school health policies and partnership position. And we hope that person will help not only with the Title V funding, with putting that Title V funding out and working with our districts, but also help move forward some of the board's initiatives around whole child and some of our partnerships. We'll also provide with that funding professional development and training for educators statewide. And we've also planned a specialized instructional support meeting, personnel meeting, bringing together teams so that they can work more closely together to help support our students and hopefully reduce some of the risk from them being early initiators of sexual behavior. So working in a team fashion there. Some of the partners that we've put into the plan that we'll be working with, the North Carolina School Health Training Center for Professional Development, the Center for Supportive Schools, that does a lot of peer education work that we're looking forward to doing with some of the students. Our Division of Public Health, internally, Character Education, and our SEL implementation team. So internal and external partners to move the work forward. So an update on our whole child pilots. Like everybody else, there was a shift in focus last year for our whole child pilots. Most of them spent the year dealing with COVID and how they could manage COVID. And they did some incredible work. And I'm just going to highlight a couple of those. The first one is Iredell-Statesville Schools, the next one. And this is not just unique to Iredell-Statesville. Their school nurses were essential. And almost every LEA, the school nurses stepped up and became vaccine administrators. And they were doing vaccines everywhere and really worked night and day to make sure that happened. And we have 15 pictures of different LEAs doing this work. It was pretty exciting to see how committed they were to the work and were willing to join in with their community to address these needs. We also were recognized, one of our nurses was, in the next slide, from Lenore County, Lynn Davis. She actually was quoted by the CDC in one of their public service announcements about the good work that had been going on, not only to help meet the needs of COVID, but also to continue to address the chronic conditions of students in our public schools. And then finally, I've talked before, and I can't say enough about the work of Dr. Harvey and her team to make sure that students ate and that families ate. But at the local level, our schools stepped up too to move that work forward. This is Johnston County. They had a backpack buddy program, as well as they worked to feed families. So it wasn't just about feeding the students, it was about feeding the entire community. In addition to that, there's been collaboration going on internally in the department to make sure that we can meet the needs of our schools externally. And you can see some of those partnerships there. So an update on Whole Child NC. Whole Child NC has been somewhat on a hiatus for a while, and we're looking forward to getting that going again. Last year, we brought you the recommendations of working in areas of leadership engagement, buy-in and support, welcoming family engagement culture, and coordination of preventive services. With your support, we're looking forward to re-energizing this group, getting our folks back together. Many of the folks that work in different organizations and agencies were also involved in their COVID efforts in the last year. So their time has not been dedicated to this work, but we hope to have them back in this work in the coming year and bring either these recommendations or changes after we see what's happened based on COVID and bring those back to you. And we had a lot of work through the agency during COVID, a lot of collaborations to make sure that we could help support our schools. And then there's also some continued collaborations that they're ongoing. There are plenty more than this, but these are just a few of the different groups that we continue to collaborate with to make sure that we're supporting the whole child needs of our students. It's quick, but hopefully it was able to give you a brief update of what's happening. And I'm, Mr. Keenan, I'm happy to answer any questions.
And the quick questions, we're a little behind time. And Dr. S, really, thank you very much for that great presentation. Any questions? Any comments?
Dwight has a question, Mr. Keenan.
Dr. Essick, are any charter schools included in the youth risk behavior survey?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
They are. They're all put into the sample and all, the magic's all done and they're drawn randomly, just like the other.
Is there any disaggregation of data in between the traditional public school and the charter school students?
No, and I think we would probably have to draw a much larger sample in order to do that. So we don't separate out when the data comes in where they were.
Thank you.
Anyone else? If not, that concludes the presentation of the RS committee. Mr. Chair, again, Dr. S is asking for our continued support. And I can think of no more crucial work for the success of our children than this whole child model. So with that, we finish, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Keenan. I agree with you. We'll now move to our Educator Standards and Practice Committee chaired by Dr. Olivia Oxendine. Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you, Chair Davis, and I have a new mission, and it's to get us to lunch in 12 minutes.
Or at least to lunch.
Dr. Essick, you said yours was fast. Watch. The first item I'm Olivia Oxendine. I chair the ESP, and joining me in that responsibility is Amy White. The first item on the agenda for ES&P is an action on first reading. That item will be taken up in closed session later today. We have a few appeals coming from educators around the state that we will listen to those recommendations and do all that work in closed session. The next item is a discussion item, ES&P 2, and this pertains to some updates, some revisions in the job classification of the Braille list. Interesting work. We do fascinating work on the State Board of Education. This is one of the, this is just a tad of what we do in a very interesting venue. And presenting is Ms. Sherry Thomas, and I believe Ms. Sherry Bernelson will join Ms. Thomas in the presentation.
Yes.
So away you go.
All right. Thank you very much, Chairman Davis, members of the board and advisors. Superintendent Truitt, it's nice to be here today. We are going to present to you for discussion, and then we'll come back next month for action on an update to our Braille list class specification. And this really was generated from questions out in the field. So we always want to make sure we're accommodating and supporting our folks out in the field, excuse me, as they are looking for these special identifications for some of our specialty areas. So I'm going to turn it over to Sherry.
Morning, and I hope we win the prize for the shortest presentation today. So the first slide that you will see is really just a formality under, your authority that you have under General Statute 115C to develop these position evaluation descriptions for non-classified public school personnel. And this is just a snapshot of that document. It guides PSUs in the development of their individual job descriptions and describes their essential work and employee characteristics. So we recently had a request from a public school unit for a job description for a Brailleist. And so we looked at this classification in the document, and upon review, we really saw some language that could be potentially problematic for districts, specifically around the instruction of students in learning and using Braille. And when students require Braille and need instruction, that should be provided by a licensed teacher of the visually impaired as a part of their individualized education program or their IEP. And so then as we reviewed further, just to more accurately reflect the work of a Brailleist and provide clarification around that. We did some tweaking or making some recommendations for that to, again, more accurately reflect the nature of work, their knowledge, skills, and abilities, and the suggested training and experience. And we are not suggesting or recommending any changes in the salary grade for that classification. That is pretty much it.
Okay, very good. Are there any questions of Ms. Thomas or Ms. Vernelson? So basically, what we are going to be doing, not today, but next month, we're going to be acting on this recommendation. And the way I summarize it in my mind is the review led to some interesting discoveries.
Yes.
And some of those discoveries were important to bring the Brailleist position in line with federal regulations, especially around EC and perhaps some other state laws and regulations. It's a very necessary work that has taken place as a result of this review. Any questions or comments? If not, we will move on to the second item on the agenda and the last item, and I think I'm doing really, really good, everyone. The second item is also a discussion item to come back next month for board action, and it has to do with the RFP pertaining to the advanced teaching roles and teacher compensation consideration. Coming forward is Dr. Edmonds, who is going to make that presentation. This is an exciting initiative that has been underway in the departments for several years, and it gives our LEAs an opportunity to think creatively, to think about new challenging roles for the classroom teacher, and then to design compensation systems accordingly. So Dr. Edmonds is going to walk us through some new thinking around the RFP and some ways to align the RFP with our strategic plan, as well as some of our requirements and needs around Leandro. Dr. Edmonds.
Thank you so much, Dr. Oxendine. I think you just gave us our lead into the presentation. Joining me today will be Dr. Tomerlin, as well as Dr. Emery, who will join us remotely. As Dr. Oxendine had shared, the next round of the Advanced Teaching Roles Request for Proposal is coming up in September. The presentation today will provide an overview of the RFP process and proposed additions for your consideration in the next round. Specifically, we would like the board to consider an equity and diversity component to the RFP. Dr. Tomerlin will give a brief overview of the RFP process and what it could potentially look like with that addition, followed by Dr. Emery, and Dr. Emery will share the connection to the Leandro plan and the supports that will be provided from the Office of Transformation. And I will turn it over to Dr. Tomerlin.
Good afternoon, board members. I'm excited to speak to you today about the RFP for our Advanced Teaching Roles program in the state of North Carolina. For many of you, you may be unfamiliar with this program, so I'm going to take a minute to review the legislation that created it. The most recent legislation that changed this initiative from a pilot to a program is North Carolina Session Law 2020-78, where this is now a program that's implemented by the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction under the supervision of the State Board of Education rather than a pilot. So the purpose of the program, as articulated in the legislation, is to increase the number of students taught by highly effective educators. Also to provide salary supplements to classroom teachers in advanced teaching roles, to allow LEAs to create innovative compensation systems that lead to measurable improvements in student outcomes, and to establish organizational changes that allow sustainability of evidence-based teaching practices. So the shift from a pilot to a program came with some requirements to issue an RFP, and that RFP has to be issued by the department annually on September 15th. The LEAs in turn submit their proposals by October 15th, and the State Board of Education selects the program participants by December 15th. So the State Board of Education approves ATR proposals submitted by October 15th if the LEA was participating in an approved program in the prior school year, and that would be the 2021 school year. So what this piece of the legislation is indicating is that current program participants can stay in the program, but it requires them to apply to the State Board of Education again to keep their participation in the program. If they were functioning last year as a program, then they have the opportunity to apply to continue to be a part of the program. So here are the required components of the RFP in the legislation. Be very quick here. Description of the structure, description of the roles themselves, including the minimal qualifications for holding that position, the job responsibilities of those advanced teachers, a communication plan to the LEA employees about what the district is doing and why they're doing it. The process for the voluntary surrender of that advanced teaching roles. Part of this is if the advanced teacher no longer meets the minimum requirements to hold the position, that they have to voluntarily surrender that role. The salary supplement information that the districts may be providing to those advanced teachers. The program implementation plan and the plan for long-term sustainability. Also in that RFP is LEAs are encouraged to partner with their ed prep programs or institutions of higher education and community college to improve teacher effectiveness and student outcomes. So those are the existing requirements. And what we're suggesting for this round of the RFP is that we specifically make some changes to align the ATR program strongly with the State Board of Education strategic plan in some certain areas. And the first is goal 1, eliminate opportunity gaps by 2025. And specifically objective 6, increase the number of educators of color in schools across North Carolina. So we would create a rubric that evaluates the plan in terms of how well the program is designed to increase the diversity of the teacher workforce for the LEA that's applying. Goal 2, improve school and district performance by 2025, and those are objectives 2 through 7. And then in goal 3, increase educator preparedness to meet the needs of every student by 2025. Objectives 1 through 4 under that goal. So our recommendations for the new RFP are to include a component to the RFP process that addresses the following. SBE goals 2 and 3, applicants describe how their ATR proposal ensures that all students in ATR districts have access to a highly effective teacher. And 2, applicants describe how ATR program will ensure that teachers, especially early career teachers, are better prepared to meet the needs of every student. And then along goal 1, objective 6 of the SBE strategic plan, the ATR proposals describe how the program will provide differentiated support to early career teachers that support all teachers of various cultural and social backgrounds. And the selection of advanced teachers should include objective measures of teacher effectiveness to ensure all qualified candidates have equal opportunity for consideration. And there are requirements in the legislation that require a certain number of measures that the LEA must use in that. And of course, one of those is EVOS. They have to use 2 of the 4 that are listed. And so what we're suggesting is where their identification plan is relying solely on subjective measures, that proposal would not yield as many points on the rubric as those that incorporate objective measures of performance. And I think now Dr. Emery will talk about how this revised RFP could help support our Leandro districts.
Thank you, Dr. Tomberlin, and greetings, state board members and Superintendent Truitt. First, I just want to lift up and thank Dr. Edmonds and Dr. Tomberlin for what I have seen throughout the agency with our leaders looking to find ways to support the action steps of the comprehensive 8-year plan, whether there are resources or not. And this is a great example of ways we can demonstrate commitment without additional funds. So I just want to thank them for their creativity and support here. This tweak to the RFP would certainly align with priority 2 and specifically the action steps related to advanced teaching roles. What the connection to transformation and our regional support model can be found in the next slide, where we would sort of use the good examples that our federal programs folks have shared with us for how we provide support to our recurring low performing districts and encourage them, help them with application process, help them interpret these new RFP requirements, and look at how specific application could be made in their districts to improve student outcomes. And so we just highly support this recommendation and appreciate the opportunity to connect the dots, not only to the board's goals, but to the comprehensive 8-year plan.
I'm happy to take any questions about our proposed changes to the RFP.
Are there any questions from my colleagues, Mr. Duncan?
This is a quick one. It ties to the question that came up earlier on EVOS. Is the suggestion that the EVOS data, which would include the gap year type analysis, would, if you had that data and submitted it, that would be helpful to an application if the data was favorable, and not helpful to the application if the data was not favorable from that?
So that's a great question. I don't think we're putting, certainly we would not prevent a district from using the 2021 EVOS data in the determination of the advanced roles. We're not, I don't think we would go as far to say that it must be there. In many cases, though, we've seen from these programs and the stronger applicants, they're using multiple years of that data. So no one year would put you in the category or out of the category. You're using 3, 4, 5 years to determine the effectiveness of those teachers. And so where that 2021 data was incorporated with prior years of data, that would certainly be a stronger case for the objective measures. We might express some concern about a single year, especially if it's 2021 data that's driving that.
Thank you.
Ms. Kamnitz?
I'm very pleased to see that this work is going to go forward and do a better job of aligning with our strategic plan. So great work here. But it also strikes me that this goes back to an early conversation around the standard course of study manual, and the districts that have difficulty finding the resources to make that jump from the standard course of study to what happens in the classroom are probably the same ones that also don't have access to people with experience in responding to an RFP like this or writing a grant. And giving that support that Dr. Emery just talked about is huge. And so I'm really glad to hear that that's part of this.
We're very excited to be working with Dr. Emery's team on this. So hopefully that support from the district, the regional district directors will facilitate that support to the districts.
I'm looking to my left to make sure I'm not overlooking the advisors way down there. Are there other questions? I do have one quick question. It has more to do with process. Dr. Tomberlin, will the board get a copy of the RFP and the rubric ahead of time? Because we're going to take action. We're going to vote next month.
That is correct. So what we would need, I think, today is a general nod from the board that this is something that the direction that you would like DPI to move. And what we can propose to do is what I would propose to do is We have the established RFP, the one that's written specifically according to the statute. And then we would develop the new RFP if, and I realize the timeline is short. If we don't get it right, and the board is not comfortable with the revised version, then the board would have the opportunity to approve the standard version, and then we can go back to the drawing board and make sure. But we are up against the September 15th deadline here. So
My guess is that you're going to work very hard to revise it and bring in these pieces that we've discussed, because I think the board would really love to see these revisions take shape in the next RFP. It's definitely. Other questions or comments? Very good. Very good. You know, one final thing. In the future, I would love to have a presentation to get a sense of some of the categories of advanced teaching roles.
Sure.
That are coming now out of a program.
Yes, so I should say that as part of the shift from a pilot to a program, the evaluation of these programs and the annual reporting on these programs does shift to the State Board of Education and the departments. So there have been some evaluations done in the past from our partners, but in the future that will be coming from the department, and I assume from our office. So
Thank you very much. And that concludes ES&P, and I'm not all that late.
Well done, Dr. Oxendine. We'll now break for lunch and return at 1:35. 1:35.
We're still live.